Welcome to the Athena Wellness Podcast, the show that invites you to take a seat around the community fire and listen to stories that inspire. I'm your host, Kathy Robinson, author, coach, and founder of Athena Wellness, a company that's dedicated to supporting you on your journey to live more wholeheartedly. Hello and welcome. Thanks so much for joining me. Today's conversation is both hopeful and practical. It's about how your healing journey can lead to new perspectives and opportunities. It's about the importance of finding ways to quiet your outer world so you can connect with your inner world. And it's about creating a unique collection of practices that can act as a collaboration with chance. I'm joined today by Cynthia Hauk, who is a teacher and the founder of mindfulcreativemuse.com. As you'll soon hear, Cynthia is passionate about helping busy women, artists, and creative entrepreneurs de-stress, embrace their inner critic, and express themselves through simple, mindful art activities. Here's what we cover: what mindful art is, the potent combination of simple art practices and journaling, how mindful art can act as self-care and enhance wellness, and the connection between creativity and spirituality. We end this episode with our Dose of Inspiration segment, where Cynthia shares some of the things that are lighting her up these days. And as always, I'll put links to those items, Cynthia's website, and her inspiring and calming YouTube channel. And now on to the show. I hope you enjoy the conversation. Cynthia, welcome to the Athena Wellness Podcast. Thanks so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Kathy. I'm happy to be here.
So please share a bit about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. So I largely share mindfulness and art activities together to help people de-stress. Usually it's for people that I find that want to meditate and find that there's some sort of block there, or creatives that also are feeling blocked and want to loosen up and try something new. So I offer different online classes and teacher trainings.
Wonderful. And tell me, how did you come to do the work that you do today?
I love that question. It's a very winding, long road.
And that's why I love to ask it.
I know that we chatted before about the hero's journey, and I had my own experience with that. I would say even several of just really healing journeys of my own that brought me closer and closer to this work. So for a time, I'll just share that I used to have a lot of anxiety in my early 20s. I had panic attacks. And then in my late 20s, I had cancer. And through both of those experiences, I sought out different ways of self-care. And I discovered a handful of different art practices, yoga practices, meditation, as well as this practice called soul collage. That's intuitive collage and writing. And so for me, creativity and art is such a healing practice. And that was something that, for myself, I had it for my own healing. And then I spent years and years doing my master's and certifications and learning to teach. And I get really excited sharing almost like a buffet or a toolbox, of these different practices that people can explore that might help them de-stress. They might feel more relaxed. Similar experiences to what I had. They might notice a deeper sense of their own intuition or deeper connection to their inner voice that I find so healing and powerful. And so, I'm really passionate about sharing the work because I had my own healing journey with it.
It's amazing how our healing journeys can lead us to new opportunities. You would have never gone there otherwise, most likely. It's a wonderful story. And I love the idea of the toolbox because, when we have multiple things that we can do, we can kind of align it to whatever suits the situation. So I love that it's not just one thing that you're offering, it's a number of things. You mentioned the words soul collage, and I've heard that before, but I'm not really sure what that is. Could you explain a little bit about what that practice is?
Yeah, so it was a practice created by an art therapist, Sina Frost, back many years ago. And it's largely intuitive collage, meaning many people are familiar with vision boards. And so with vision boards, usually you have a set intention. You're finding and cultivating, choosing words and images that you want to, intend for your next year is often with vision boards. Intuitive collage and soul collage is coming at it from sort of the opposite end. So instead of knowing what your intention is and finding the images and words to bring that intention to life, instead you sort of look at images in magazines, you notice what you feel drawn to or repelled by, and allow yourself to choose those images. And the card that you create, you end up creating a collaged card. The card you create, I find, often is a surprise because you have no idea where it's going as you're creating it. And we've talked about this before, but something that was so powerful for me that really informs mindful art activities is this quote by a teacher of mine called, she used to say, collaborate with chance. And I find that so true in this intuitive collage practice as well. And what I love about it is that there's such a big permission for you to be curious, to see where things might take you. And I think it's a big invitation for our subconscious and for the part of ourselves that wants to creatively express ourselves to do that without feeling pressured, without feeling like I know what the end product is ahead of time. Because I think sometimes that can stifle us, and it can cause us to make different choices that might not be true to how we're feeling in the moment. So the intuitive collage process, that's how you choose images. But then there's also a really deep writing process afterwards with prompts and questions and ways that you can interpret your own images that you created. And again, I see it as just a mirrored reflection. It's just our own subconscious speaking to ourselves. But it's really lovely. I found it when I was doing cancer treatment and I couldn't touch electronics. I was quarantined and had done radiation. And I just find that so many people now can relate to a similar experience of quarantined and maybe finding new potential ways of spending our time and exploring self-care. So I just love it. It's one of my favorite practices.
It's funny. I never made this connection before, but I started something while we were in lockdown, and it's kind of something similar, but it's with journaling. So you're actually incorporating these images in your journal. But this is almost a way, and you used the words before, of kind of contacting that inner voice. And that sounds so elusive, but when you have a tangible practice, it's a lovely way of kind of getting at that, which you call your practices mindful art. And I think we've talked around it a little bit, but for our listeners, can you say a little bit about what it is and who it's for, anything that we haven't covered that would help them understand what these practices are and how they can help and who they can help?
Definitely. So mindful art, the way that I teach it, includes a combination of mindfulness, meditation practices, and really simple art practices, sometimes doodling, sometimes drawing or painting or collage. The combination of that, the root of it, the intention is to invite us to be more present in the current moment and having tangible, paper and scissors. We can hear that we're cutting the paper. We can feel the paper in our hands. There's something about that slowing down and having all of our senses engaged that I think really lends itself to mindfulness and meditation. So a lot of the people I work with that have tried to sit on a cushion and they say, I can't clear out all of my thoughts, or I can't meditate. I think that that's a big myth, that's not what meditation is to me. We're never going to completely clear out all of our thoughts all the time. Instead, these practices and mindful art is just a softer way to invite us to be curious right now in this present moment, and to do it in a way that's maybe joyful and playful and with different art materials. The other thing I love to really explain about it is that the focus is on the process, not the final product. So I have a MFA in the arts. I love creating things aesthetically. I had a photography business for 7 years. So I'm not discounting the aesthetic part of creating art. And I usually will say a lot of times people will love what they end up making with mindful art. But there's something about removing the pressure, that we're not creating it to perform, to sell a piece, to put something on the wall, to show it off, that this practice is really for ourselves and for our self-care. And I find that also loosens things up a bit. So you don't have to have, a strong art background to do this work. And if you do have a strong art background, that's great. This can just be a new thing to bring into your practice.
Mm. A couple of things came to mind there. And that is, going back to what you were saying about cutting out the paper and using all your senses. And maybe this was part of your healing journey as well. When you really are present with something like that, you're in that moment, and there is that, not only that sense of slowing down, but a sense of relief and a reminder that you're part of something larger and you're being held in some way, that I think it brings on a sense of calm that maybe we might think it's because we're doing art, but that presence, to your point, is probably that anchor, that keeps bringing us back. But what I loved about two things, one, for the non-artist, this idea of inducing a flow state, which is not something a non-artist will normally do. And so to be able to access the joy of that, of getting lost in something for no other reason than they're getting lost in it. And then on the artist side, it's akin to a writer having a writer's notebook and, keeping notes and ideas and topics and things you might want to come back to. I would think some of the things that are coming out of your practices might lead to other things. Have you seen that for folks who really are artists?
Yeah, I love that question. So I teach a lot of 5-minute mindful art activities and practices, largely because I've noticed for myself and a lot of people I've worked with the last couple of years, there's such a strong sense of overwhelm that having it be really simple and in bite-sized pieces feels more sustainable to build it into our daily self-care. And so I mention that to say that a lot of the artists that I work with will explore 5-minute, 10-minute mindful art activities as a way of warming up, getting looser with their creativity. They might not even be working in that particular media later. So I teach a lot of art journaling practices with drawing and watercolors and writing. And they might be a pure writer, but will play with that and then find that it sparks ideas in their other work later. So I like this other idea that our work doesn't have to be a finished piece each time. And that's something I think any creative that I've connected with, we often talk about having a practice and trusting the process, that what I'm doing right now, I'm just showing up. I'm just going to be here with myself, with these materials, to give myself that space and that anchor that you're talking about, and to not necessarily have an intention that this has to lead somewhere else. And usually what I find is there's lots of small stepping stones. One thing that we do will inform something else that we do later, whether that's our intention or not. It's just how our subconscious and our brains and bodies work. So I do find that it can spark a lot of things as far as creativity goes. And I think it also is really helpful for moving through blocks. Writer's block, if you have been doing a creative practice, but it's just feeling kind of stale, or even you were talking about self-care. I think, my mom loves to garden. We were chatting about this before. I think my mom loves to garden. My sister loves to cook. There's so many different ways. And so there's something to me that's really freeing about just trying and experimenting a different way and seeing how it lands for you.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a favorite story of somebody who had like a major breakthrough or made a leap as a result of doing this that just warms your heart?
I have so many of them. That's why I do this work. It's really, I think that's one of the sweetest things for me that I love, is hearing the aha, like sweet moments that people have. And I feel grateful that they'll share them with me. Two immediately come to mind because I had such visceral goosebumps on my body when they shared it with me. One is a woman that she used to be in an art and yoga teacher training that I had, and I had shared the intuitive collage process with her that we were speaking about. She had actually had a lot of grief around her father passing not long ago, within a year before we had worked together, and just had a lot of unprocessed grief. what I love about that collage process, you mentioned it briefly earlier, is that sometimes we don't have the words. And so being able to explore something through imagery for ourselves can be really powerful if we're feeling stuck around words. And so she did the process, and then some emotion sort of came up then, and she slept. She had really interesting dreams, and then we chatted the next day, and she shared that there were certain reflections in the imagery back to her that just gave her a lot of peace around her father passing that she didn't have, that she had been seeking for a long time and couldn't. She would try different things, but she wasn't getting there. And so that has absolutely nothing to do with me. It's the power of this practice and of this reflection of when we have that safe container, we can allow our subconscious and ourselves to choose images or make marks that feel good to us in the moment or that are calling to us in the moment, and then have the space to listen and see what's there. I think it can be really powerful. And then another woman that I always love to share is I had shared one of my doodling practices with her during an online retreat as a way to de-stress. It's lots of little doodles with watercolors. And she actually shared it with her 7-year-old son who had been having a lot of tantrums. This was during like the height of the pandemic. And she said that he was really curious about what she was doing. She gave, his own journal and had him go up to his bedroom. And she said he went up like really excited every day for a week to have his own doodling practice. And that she saw he had less tantrums, he could focus more, that there was such this, powerful shift. And I love those stories, I think the most because it's unintentional. It's like a unintentional gift from this work, just from having a container. I love that you used that word earlier because I often talk about mindful art as a way that we can create a wide enough container for ourselves to just be in the present moment. And that's really what, in both of those cases, what they were doing. They were tuning out the past, the future. They were just being right now in the moment. And in that space, they found certain levels of peace for themselves, which I think is really beautiful.
Thank you for sharing that. And I'm glad you mentioned the breath doodling exercise because I did go on. You have a beautiful YouTube channel, just gorgeous.
Thank you.
And in fact, when I was looking at the videos, I was actually, without doing the practice, and I know that's not the point of it, but you actually do get a sense of calm and centering as you watch that. So I can only imagine what it's like. But that doodling practice really caught my eye. Can you talk a little bit about what that is, how it came about, and why it's so effective?
Absolutely. I've heard that from other students of mine we have a group where we get together weekly, and some of them have mentioned that they'll just go and watch the video when they feel stressed out and not even do the practice.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Yes, I love that. I have a handful of different drawing breath practices and doodling practices on there. So I'm not sure. I'll speak to 2 different ones that I think you might be referring to. One is I just call it a meditative doodling practice. I had been playing with watercolors, and just a side note, I used to always do oils. I had started with Bob Ross and painting happy trees, and then did abstracts. And I always used to say I could never do watercolors because I would just make a big muddy mess. And over years, it just changes. So with watercolors, what I really love about doing a wet and wet process is that the colors can blend together and you can get these really interesting organic shapes just naturally as the water starts to dry. And so I was just placing down color in a mandala circle shape and was deciding what I was going to do later. And I noticed just all of these really interesting lines naturally in the paint. And so I started embellishing those lines and tracing them almost like you would in a coloring book, just sort of in an opposite way. And so I started tracing some of those lines and working from the center of that circle, that mandala shape out. And then I noticed as I was doing it how calming it was, that there's just this slow creation of this mandala. And I automatically could choose the lines because it was just based on the marks that were already there. So it felt really easy to step into that. So that was a practice that I just naturally sort of discovered as I was playing with some of my materials. And then I realized, if I find this so calming, maybe some of my students would find this calming as well. So I had shared it and then modified it and continued to share. Another practice that's on there that I'm happy to walk us through a little bit, if you'd like, is a drawing breath meditation. So I'm not sure. I know you had mentioned maybe wanting to explore one practice together. Do you want me to share that?
Yeah, we'll do that on the Wellness Wednesday conversation.
Okay.
So stay tuned, everybody. You've also talked about writing as being a component of this. And I love this idea of holding a question as you're going through your practices. Is that something that you invite your students to do, or does that just kind of happen naturally? And what's that combination like?
Yeah, it does vary depending on the practice. So I do offer different journaling prompts and questions. Sometimes it's before we start creating. I'll have a question or a prompt or invite them to create an intention before we start making marks. Other times it's mid-process, so once the image is there, and then I'll offer different, I call them creative journaling prompts. So different questions in response to the marks that we're making. And then sometimes it's entirely separate. So we'll do some body-based work and imagery. So it really varies depending on the practice, how much time we have, really how long they've been doing a lot of these practices as well. So what I share on my YouTube channel is sort of more surface level. And then if you go to courses, it goes a little deeper. And then if we spend longer time together, you can kind of dive deeper in the writing and the reflection processes. A couple of the main questions or prompts that really come up that's inspired by Soul Collage is the message that I have for you is. So once the image is there, just opening an invitation for the message to arise. And then I have other things like where we can write actual letters to ourselves. And I do a lot of work with the inner critic because I'm a recovering perfectionist, as many people I work with are as well. Mm-hmm. And so I notice our inner critic and thoughts can sometimes, be really harsh to ourselves at times. And so I have a writing process that plays with this invitation of how you can be kind to your inner critic and how we can enliven the inner muse in us, this part of us that wants to create, that has that freedom of creative expression. So there's so many different ways that I invite writing.
I love the combination though, because we're already, as you say, loosening up whatever it is that might feel constricted by working with materials. And then you're adding in another side and not knowing what you're tapping into to get the answer. I'm sure it leads to interesting places. I love it. I love that practice. Mm-hmm. We've talked a bit about art and wellness, but you do say that these practices help busy people de-stress. Can you talk a little bit more about that connection between art practices or writing practices and how they can help optimize or improve people's wellness?
Definitely. So I'm going to share a trite cliche because it's so pertinent, I believe. But when you hear about, I just flew last week. And so, when you're on the plane and they talk about when the oxygen mask drops, like secure your own mask first. And I see a lot of mindful art activities as a way of securing our own oxygen mask first. It's really a way that we can be with ourselves in the moment and tune out a lot of the exterior, right? I find myself and so many of the people that I work with are really overwhelmed and busy. And largely, I find our time is sucked away so often with digital media, social media. We have responsibilities and people that, we're caring for, or if you're a parent, as an example, we have all of these things that are pulling for our attention and our time and our energy. And so even if it's, that 5-minute mindful art activity I was mentioning, if we can create a little safe haven for ourselves, that container of just 5 minutes that we can tune out the rest of the world and obligations and time pressures, I find that to be such a gift for our self-care, for our mental health in a lot of cases. But there's something about it where I notice there's that slowing down. It can help to alleviate stress just naturally because there is that I notice that the breath starts to slow down. And as we're being focused on a mark on a page and on our pen moving on the page, if we get really engrossed in that process, it's really hard to keep thinking about our to-do list or the thing I forgot to do last week or this thing that's been, sitting on my shoulders for months that I have to deal with. It doesn't solve any of those problems with this practice, but what it does do, I find for myself, is that it just opens up a little bit of breathing room, even just for those 5 minutes. And we talked about a practice. The more we can do that and build up that practice similar to meditation, the more that we are actually helping to rewire our brains. I'm reminding my body it's okay to be here right now in this moment. It's okay to just focus on this one line work and notice my breath. And I think that that's hugely powerful. And so there's so many people that have been benefiting from this type of mindful art activities, especially the last year or two.
Mm-hmm. Let's take the flip side of that. You spoke a little bit about the inner critic, and some of the reasons why our creativity does not get expressed is because of our own inner talk track, whether it's, you don't have the time to do that, or you're not good at it, or whatever the track might be. What is the impact to our well-being when it's not expressed?
I love this question. It can show up and manifest in a couple of different ways. Sometimes I find that it happens while you're creating mid-process, or it can even be where you have those internal thoughts and then you just never begin or start. Those are what I like to think of as kind of the smaller ways that our inner critic shows up. Like maybe it's I want to do this mindful art practice and then I'm just never starting or I'm getting stuck. The other way I find that the inner critic shows up that feels bigger is that maybe I have a creative dream that I've wanted to do for the last year or several years, and I'm not allowing myself to explore that. Maybe so many people I know want to write a book. It's like 80 or 90% of people want to write a book. And so maybe your dream is writing a book and that's not getting expressed. And I find that there's something, and everybody has different beliefs. I find for me, there's something else that is wanting to be expressed. Sometimes it's my own internal intuition. Other times it's almost, this is why the muse is in my business name. It's almost like there's this other creative force that wants to be expressed larger. And I believe maybe that's a way of giving back into the world. And so when we're not allowing ourselves to creatively express, whether it's on the micro level for ourselves or a macro level for a bigger dream, I feel like it's such a disservice. We're either not allowing ourselves to give the gift of potential creative healing to ourselves or to give that creative inspiration and expression to others. And I'm a huge believer that everything I have heard has been done before and it hasn't been done by you. And we each have our own set of experiences and backgrounds that are so beautiful and unique. And I think there's real power in being able to express that. So the cost of not expressing it, I find for myself, it lives in my body. I notice I'll have more, like if I'm not doing my mindful art activities, I'll have more tension in my body. My breath gets tighter. I sometimes will get just more agitated. I'm not as centered and grounded. And then if I have a bigger dream that's been sitting on the shelf, like I've also wanted to write a book for years, and thankfully I'm doing that this year. But for years, I wanted to write a book, and it feels for me like a pit in my stomach. It's just this big creative dream that has not been birthed, and there's a certain level of grief around that. And so I think everybody has their own ways they're creative. You might not be an artist, with pen and paper on the page, but that doesn't mean that there's not something inside of you that wants to be expressed. And I think that our nervous systems just hold it in stress if we're not expressing it in some way. That's my belief.
I think that's well said. Of it kind of lodges itself in your body and in your nervous system. Taking it one step even further, the connection between creativity and spirituality. Have you seen your students increase their interest in spirituality as a result of doing these practices? Or do they sometimes come to these practices with the desire to go deeper? Is there a connection there?
I love that question. It really is so varied. The YouTube channel you mentioned that I have, I think at this point right now, it's reached 50 countries and growing. And my online classes and teacher trainings, they're international. So I like that when we come together, it's people from all over the world, which also means it's people with completely different interests and backgrounds as far as spirituality is concerned. So some people are religious, some people aren't religious, some people believe in God or a higher power, some people don't. What I have noticed is sort of a common thread that is interwoven in this work is that there's so many small light bulb aha moments that happen. And majority of the time when that does happen and we chat about it, there's a recognition that there's something more, that it's not just about that one person in that one moment. And that might be connected to their spirituality. It might be connected to their community. It might be connected to, feeling more at purpose in the world. I have a lot of people that do my teacher trainings that some have a spiritual foundation and others don't call it a spiritual foundation and it doesn't resonate in that way, but they feel a deeper call to have a sense of purpose in the world. And so I would say that the underlying thread is purpose. And by having a container where we're tuning into ourselves and giving ourselves permission for play and possibility for something else to surface that we don't have to control, we don't have to know of right away, there is something around that feels really collaborative and gives people deeper meaning in their lives. And so that's really beautiful for me to witness, is that deeper meaning that they're sort of excavating for themselves, regardless of, how it's sort of labeled. That's been my experience with a lot of my students.
Mm-hmm. Well said. Before we go on to our dose of inspiration and get your contact information, is there anything else about your practice, about the business, about your services, about creativity that we haven't touched on that you'd like to share with our audience?
I've been really curious lately around noticing what is lighting up creativity and just giving pockets of space to explore that. And so I mentioned that to say that maybe some people have Pinterest boards that they're drawn to. Maybe some people have, Instagram accounts that they follow, or books they love, or, a favorite cafe they sit in and just give themselves space to daydream and doodle. Whatever it is that can help add to your creativity fire, that spark or interest you have in your life. My invitation or sort of hope would be this week that you have just 10 minutes more of that space, whatever that looks like for you. And to continue to honor that, to make space for that inner creative part of ourselves that wants to be curious and playful and see new things or try new things or express new things.
Beautiful. It seems when we focus on that over time, that space does expand.
Yes.
Yeah. So I love that you use the phrase lighting you up, because that's what we're going to explore on your behalf. We have a segment called Dose of Inspiration to have our listeners to get to know you a little bit more and to learn about what's lighting you up. So I would love to know what you've read or listened to lately that you've enjoyed.
I love that question. So I've been listening to a lot of Bobby McFerrin's circle songs on Spotify. I do improvisational circle singing with some friends who play with jazz, and I have a daily practice right now of singing, and I'll pull either a soul collage card that I've made or different images, and I'll sing from that card. So that has been a really just a fun, playful new practice of exploring not only creatively expressing myself through imagery and written word, but through vocal sounds. And Bobby McFerrin is amazing. So I love
And it
him.
sounds like a new course in the making.
Oh, yeah, possibly. It's super early right now. I'm enjoying the practice for myself.
Possibility. Just saying, it feels like something's knocking there. When are you most in your element and truly feel like yourself?
When I feel safe. Yeah. And I think that's largely why I'm so interested in a variety of self-care practices for myself as a way to have ground and then to feel more safe to express. And then also I'm really passionate around holding that space for other people. But yeah, safety comes first for me.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. What new thing or experience are you looking forward to trying?
I love that question. So we were chatting right before we started around spring. I'm really excited that spring is coming. I also was just reading a book called Nature-Based Expressive Arts Therapy, which I love, by Sally Atkins. And so I've been wanting to spend more time in nature, and I do little drawing practices in my travel journal in nature as well. And I don't like snow or ice, so I tend to not do a lot of that during winter. So I'm really excited that things are starting to warm up here in Colorado, and I can just get in nature more and doodle and just breathe in the trees.
Me too. I love that. Envision your perfect road trip. Where do you go? What do you do?
Ooh, can I use the flying car?
You can do it can be anywhere in the world. Money's no object, time's no object. Let's dream big.
Oh my goodness. So I should say I was nomadic for 3 years, right around the end of my photography business that I had. And I used to photograph in a lot of different states. So I love travel and just seeing new things. I think it can broaden our perspective. I really would love to do some sort of flying car and just take a year and do a round the world trip, just seeing different cultures and art and nature. I'm really interested in people's experiences of what home means to them and what things they find really encouraging for themselves. So yeah, it would be fun to just create art and travel and chat with people.
Beautiful. What has you feeling inspired these days aside from spring? What's lighting you up?
Possibility, which I suppose is still tied into spring, but largely a lot around possibility. We spoke a little bit around, that hero's journey, things that are kind of challenges and then moving through them. And I haven't been in that place the last couple of years, but there has been what feels to me like the slower, muddied water in some ways with certain projects. And I'm coming to a place where it's just becoming really open. So I have a lot of projects that are launching this year that I'm really excited about. And I'm really curious about possibility around what is possible. Yeah.
Nice. And lastly, what has you optimistic about the future?
I feel like I'm a natural optimist at heart. I typically I can find the silver lining in any situation. Yeah. So I don't know that there's anything that drives that outside of it's just innately built into who I am, and my belief in growth, in the resiliency of humans and animals, and yeah, it's
a much needed quality. So that's good. A much needed quality in these times. Yeah. So tell me, Cynthia, what's the best way for our listeners to get in touch with you?
Yeah, the easiest way is on my website at mindfulcreativemuse.com. I have a contact page there. I have a lot of different resources about mindful art activities and videos and other books I recommend. So there's a lot on there.
Perfect. Well, it was really such a wonderful conversation. I thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate your time today.
Oh, thanks for having me, Kathy.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I know there are many ways you can spend your time. Thank you for choosing to spend it with me. Until our paths cross again, be kind to yourself and show your warrior spirit some love. If you know anyone who could benefit from today's episode, please pass it on. And many thanks for supporting the show by subscribing and leaving a review. It means a lot, and it helps others find their way to our circle. If you'd like to access the show notes, have a question you'd like addressed on a future episode, or would like a transcript of this episode, visit www.athenawellness.com/podcast. Until next time, be well.